for a session produced by our underwriter, the American Association for Cancer Research, please welcome Dr. Elizabeth Jaffee, President of AACR and Deputy Director of the Johns Hopkins Kimmel Cancer Center, and author Neil Canavan.
Dr. Jaffee, hello. First, I just want to say you've been the president of AACR for the last year. That consists of helping to organize the annual meeting, which this year was 22,000 strong. The organization of satellite meetings, which deal with more specific aspects of cancer care. Those go on throughout the year. You're also involved in various initiatives to increase awareness, to increase care within the community. You also happen to be a practicing oncologist and the deputy director at Johns Hopkins. So the first question, rhetorical, you don't really sleep, do you?
Well, it sounds really terrible when you put it that way.
Well, I want to talk about, today we're going to talk about those initiatives. The first being science convergence. Can you explain that concept for me?
Yeah, science convergence is a concept that's been there for quite a while, but I think it's become more important in cancer research and also cancer care. What it means is we're bringing people with expertise from different areas like mathematics and engineering and computational biology to really attack a single complex problem. In this case, it's cancer.
Now, way back when I was in graduate school, the physicists looked down on the chemists, who looked down on the biologists, and we all looked down on the psych majors. So how do you gather these people together to come for a common goal? For one thing, it strikes me like they don't even speak the same language.
Yeah, you know, that's a really good question, and it's true. It's very hard, but I think that, you know, we're making such progress in cancer research, and everyone in other fields is seeing this, and they're all excited. They're all coming to us and wanting to join in. But the issue is we really do need to explain to each other, and you could look at it as a challenge, or you could look at it as something exciting where we get to learn from each other, and that's what's happening. But I think the next challenge, in addition to teaching each other the field, is to really teach the next generation and cross-train them. And a number of groups, a number of institutions are starting to develop programs specifically for this. And cancer is in the center of this because it's so important and it does require all of this expertise.
Does this tie into something called GENIE? Could you explain that for me?
The GENIE project?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the GENIE project is an AACR initiative. And this is a very important project that's really helping progress in cancer care, and in particular, personalized medicine. It stands for genomics, oh boy, this is bad. Okay, it's a genomics.
I got it. Genomics, evidence, neoplasia.
Information exchange.
Boy, you really tortured that acronym.
I know, I did, sorry.
Okay.
So, yeah, I like GENIE better, it's a lot easier. But what it really is it basically has brought together 19 different centers where patients are being seen and their tumors are being genetically sequenced. And it's collating in databases their genetic sequencing with their clinical outcomes data, as well as with their response to treatment. And so I believe there's over 40,000 patients' tumors now in there. So why is this important? Well, this is important for many reasons. First, it brings people from all over the world with the same cancers, but it may be genetically different due to different causes. It allows us to start to better define the genetics and which of the genetics will predict responses to which treatments. So now we can say, well, maybe this patient who we didn't realize had this genetics might respond to that therapy, even though it may not be approved for that specific cancer, it may be approved for that specific genetic change. In addition, it helps us identify new genetic changes so that we can develop new drugs against those genetic changes. So we're going to learn a lot from this program. And also, it turns out that AACR is giving this information to the NCI's commons, where they are collating from other sources as well, sequence data. So this is going to be a national resource. It's already a national resource for really moving the science forward into clinical practice.
I would like to point out that part of this, the emerging science behind this, there's something called an MSI high patient, which came out of this work. And it's the first time a drug has been approved for tumors that are agnostic. It doesn't matter if it's in your lung, in your colon, or whatever. If you have the target, it will work. And one such patient is here today, Stephanie Johal, and she'll be speaking later. Do you also have meetings where you get the various stakeholders together to try to listen to each other?
Yeah, that's a good point. So we just had a conference on convergence where we brought together individuals who are working in this area. And again, we brought mathematicians, engineers, cancer biologists, computational scientists. And we talked about the emerging technologies. And now with these emerging technologies, we're getting all this data. How do you analyze them? You know, currently we're analyzing cancers by looking at a slide of tissue. Well, that's two-dimensional. We could stain for certain proteins. Imagine now we're bringing all these really smart people in to think about this problem, and what they're doing is they're developing machine learning ways to look at four-dimensional pictures of a cancer, and you can see all the different proteins from all the different cells. Imagine all the new targets we're going to identify for treatment, but also for prevention of cancer.
This is all very exotic and wonderful news, but if you can't get the treatment, then it's not going to do you any good. Yet another study recently showed that minorities have much poorer outcomes in cancer care. So on the topic of your initiative of disparities in healthcare, what other aspects of disparities are we seeing?
Right, so this is a major public health problem. So there are a number of different associated causes of this problem. They're socioeconomic, their healthcare access. Believe it or not, many people don't have good access. Their diet, their lifestyles, their genomics, genetics. And the majority of cancer patients have at least one of these problems. So this is a major healthcare problem that we need to address. And clinical research needs to address this. You know, in the past, we have not been including these populations into our research trials, and we need to figure out how to do that better.
What sort of initiatives are you doing to address that?
Right, so we have a number of initiatives. We just had a think tank, as well as we had, again, we convened a workshop symposium where we actually identified the issues and brought this to the greater community's awareness. And we're talking about other researchers, we're talking about patient advocates, we're talking about patients and survivors. They were all at this conference identifying the issues and talking about how can we solve these problems so we can do a better job at healthcare delivery to patients of all different backgrounds, all different socioeconomic status.
And finally, survivorship. Cancer caregivers now have a sort of a luxury problem in that their patients are living. So we now have to deal with their ongoing medical issues related to that. This is the same in HIV, where you're not dying of HIV anymore. You're dying of cardiovascular disease, of anal cancer. All these things are related to the thing that was saving your life to begin with. To begin with, what kind of numbers are we looking at? What's the scope of this issue?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. So from a historical perspective, if you think about it, so back in 1971, around the time of the declaration of war on cancer, as you heard about earlier today, there were 3 million survivors in the United States. Today, there's over 15 million, and as of 2040, we anticipate there to be over 25 million survivors in the United States alone. I mean, that's great news. And why is this? Well, all of a sudden we're accelerating the therapy after 30 to 40 years of this war on cancer research funding, and now we're making progress. And of course we want to make more progress, but we have to start to think about what does this mean to people who are living years instead of months? Well, these therapies still have acute and chronic toxicities.
If I could interrupt for just a second, there was a study that came out just a couple of years ago, and it showed that children who have experienced chemotherapy have, on average, lower IQ rates. So, I mean, we need to look at this from kids on up.
We have to look from the beginning, absolutely. Kids, in fact, there's more kids who've survived, and they're the ones where we should start. But it is going to have different effects on kids because of the developmental issues, and adults, they're already, you know, their brains developed, other areas, but they're going to have chronic conditions such as heart disease, diabetes. So I think there are some similar issues and some different issues. We need research in the whole spectrum so that we can make sure that survivors can live a high quality of life long term.
And then again, so that's obviously the problem. What sort of solutions are we looking at?
Yeah, so I think that we definitely need to be able to identify the problems. Again, we need, what some of the areas in which the ACR has participated. They have this wonderful program that's a scientist-survivor partnership working together to identify the issues, to come up with solutions. They also have outreach programs to the community where they have both webinars and they have discussion groups on all of these issues, and I recommend people participating. They've had 4 just this year in different cities across the country, so there's a lot going on in this, but we're hoping to do even more, and that's one of my initiatives.
The magazine?
Right, thank you for reminding me. They have Cancer Today, and Cancer Today is a wonderful magazine. It highlights the progress in layman terms for cancer care and also cancer research, and it also has some inspiring stories from patients and from their caregivers about what it's like to do this.
We spoke just prior to this about caregivers. There was a Coley Awards dinner, I think in this room, not long ago, and Jed Walchuk, who you just heard, was on stage, and a cancer survivor, Jed Walchuk's patient, was in the audience. I was sitting next to her, and next to her was her husband. And she was beaming because her hero was on stage, and her husband was shattered because I think I'm the only one who ever asked him how he was doing. Do you see this amongst your patients and your families?
Yes, I definitely see this amongst my patients and families, and I have a personal experience. My husband died of ALS while my kids were in middle and high school, and so I understand from a caregiver point of view the struggles, and most people were focused on my husband, as I was, but a few people came to me and said, "What do you need? You're doing a great job." And those small words and sentences went a long way, and I say that because I have the personal experience, and it kept me going through hard times so that I could do the best that I could. So it's very important to also support those caregivers out there.
Well, thank you for that. Any final thoughts? Anything we missed?
I just wanted to say a few things. First, I want to mention that we're very excited that Katie Couric and Lisa Paulson, who are Stand Up to Cancer representatives, they're going to be talking later, and the ACR has partnered with them to distribute over $400 million of research, bringing, again, people together, groups together for convergence science to attack the cancer problem. I also wanted to mention that we have a booth. I believe it's near the coat room, and you should go visit. There's a cancer quiz after our little talk here, so go take the quiz. But importantly, there's also the 2018 Cancer Progress Report, and you could find out a lot more about what's going on in the field from that report. It's very helpful. We present it to Congress every year, and they love it. So thank you all.
Dr. Jaffee, thank you.